Ladies, gentlemen, comrades and friends, welcome to Bat Country. Today, I'd like to finish the story that I started in the last video. In that video, I was only focused on the rock bottom part of it, but that was only half the story. And today, I want to finish that story, put it behind me, and talk about how that experience ultimately led to me getting sober, or at least starting to get sober. That previous video is quite long, quite detailed. You don't need to go and watch it if you haven't already. I know I make longer than necessary videos. I guess I like the sound of my own voice, hence the expensive microphone equipment. And I'm grateful really that anyone takes the time out of their day to listen to me ramble about my various self-inflicted misfortunes. Thank you for it. It means a lot to me. But just to bring us up to speed, here's a quick recap of where we left the previous video, and we can continue from there. Now, if you did watch the previous one about one of my rock bottoms, then you feel free to skip this, check in the chapters. Okay, so the previous video and the rock bottom story that I told was about how I ended up in jail in Kazakhstan. It was about how I had suffered a minor traumatic brain injury, a frontal lobe contusion to be specific, while cycling in China, and how I didn't know that had happened. I didn't know I'd incurred that injury, which had such an impact on my behavior. It was about how I had begun to recognize something might be wrong with me while I was living in Shanghai, and it was about how I had decided to treat that issue by cycling alone from Shanghai to London. Saying that makes me laugh every time, because it's such a stupid idea. It did nothing to deal with what the actual problem was. In fact, it just made it worse. I mean, cycling around the world is rarely the right solution, but particularly not for me back then. I find it funny. All I can do now is look back on that period of my life and kind of shake my head in disbelief at that decision. But in seriousness, a frontal lobe injury like mine, it can have an impact on your decision making. And I often wonder whether I would have even decided to go on that journey had that injury not happened. How influential was that frontal lobe injury? Did I go on the journey to treat the injury that I didn't know I had? Or did the injury that I didn't know I had force me to go on this journey? I don't know. You know, in The Matrix, when Neo meets the Oracle for the first time, and she says, "Don't worry about the vase," and then he smashes the vase, and then she says, "What's really gonna bake your noodle is, would you still have smashed the vase if I hadn't said anything?" And that's largely how I feel about my head injury. Okay, so I'm already rambling. Let's focus, because this is going to be a long and relatively intense one. So the point is that I did do it. I went on this wild, crazy bike ride recklessly across the Silk Road, and for a while, about 3 or 4 months, it worked. I did stay sober. But then after a series of traumatic experiences, some of which I detailed in the previous video, I started slamming it, man. Just ridiculous, reckless, dangerous amounts of alcohol every day. Hard Central Asian liquor measured by the litre virtually every day for any excuse, and sleeping rough and scrounging food. And in that area of the world, you don't stay in, if you're travelling like I do, you don't stay in hotels, rarely hostels. What you do is you go and knock on somebody's door and you politely ask if you can sleep in their garden. They always say yes, and they will always provide you with food in the evening and tea and alcohol. I did that once somewhere outside Jalalabad in Kyrgyzstan. And in the morning at about 7 a.m, the owner of the house, the father of the family that lived there, brought me a bowl of cherries that he'd picked off the tree in the garden and a big bottle of vodka. And we sat there and ate cherries and drank vodka, and I taught some English to his kids until we were smashed. 11 a.m. in the morning. I was already extremely drunk, and I still had a day of cycling across the Central Asian steppe ahead of me. In Kazakhstan, a hostel owner agreed to let me stay for free as long as I became his drinking buddy. And of course, I obliged him, which is partially why I ended up staying in Kazakhstan far longer than I should have. Free accommodation, free alcohol. All of that, and the scary things like being robbed at knife point and gunpoint, and all of the alcohol eventually led to me being in jail in Kazakhstan after punching a policeman. I described in that video the rock bottom I experienced while withdrawing from alcohol in a 40 degrees Celsius jail cell somewhere in the Kazakh desert, watching a guy stitch up his stab wound with his own shoelace. And that's where I left that story. But that's not where it ended. Quick side note about that particular guy. I mentioned in that video that I had a photograph of him, and if you wanted to see it, you were free to reach out to me and I would share it privately. And it turns out a lot of you wanted to see it. So I've shown a few people, but it showed me that I may as well put it in the video just to save the questions about it. So this is him. Which side shall I go? Yeah, let's go this side. So this is him, but this is the guy. This guy, he doesn't know it, but he is my rock bottom. You can see the shoelace in the wound if you look very closely. There's some antiseptic toilet cleaner around it, and if you look on his arm, you'll see a bandage where his defensive wound was. I said in that video that you can see that his fingers were turning purple, such as the extent of that arm wound, and you can see it very clearly in this photograph. This man is in a bad way. And there, but for the grace of God, go I. Also, this photo was taken inside the jail, so you can kind of get a sense of the conditions in that place. Just from the dust and the bricks, it's not like a Western jail, not even a bad Western jail. This place didn't have much need for razor wire and guard towers. The desert was its defense. It was barren in 100 kilometers in every direction. And there's no escape except into death. Okay, so that's a quick recap, and that brings us roughly up to speed. Let's continue from there. And let's talk specifically again about how alcohol was increasingly having an impact on my decision-making, or lack thereof. Welcome back to the people who skipped. So I'd been in jail for 7 days, I think, when a guard told me that I had a phone call. I had no idea who it could be. No one had spoken to me about my case. I hadn't spoken to a lawyer, any government official. I hadn't even spoken to my family in that time, who must have been going out of their mind with worry, because they'd all been watching me on social media descend into a hopeless, drunken vagrant in the Central Asian steppe, one of the most dangerous places in the world. In fact, everyone had watched. Everyone who was following the journey had watched. Everybody knew I had a problem but me. But when this phone call came in, I was sober. I'd been in the prison for a week, and the alcohol had left my body, and the worst of the withdrawal was over. And as a result of that, for better or worse, I remember this conversation quite well. I picked up the phone and I said, hello? And then this terribly British voice on the other end said, "Good morning, this is the British Embassy in Astana. To whom am I speaking?" And it was such a relief to hear that accent. Even in England, we make fun of people who speak like that. We're not all from Downton Abbey. But out there, after that long and in that place against the roughness, the coarseness of the desert, hearing that BBC accent, it was like hugging your favourite pillow. I've never been glad to hear that accent until then. Usually nothing good happens when you hear that accent. But I was glad to hear it. It was so reassuring. I just kind of blurted out automatically. I remember I said my name and then I was like, "I'm British, from Britain." I'm making myself posher and emphasising my own Britishness in an attempt, I guess, to make them help me faster, or more likely to help. I'm not sure. So the voice said, "Oh, good. I understand you require consulate assistance." And I said, "Yes, I had an altercation with the policeman. But I was defending myself. He was trying to rob me. I can explain. I just need to get to the port in Aktau and take the ferry to Baku in Azerbaijan. That's what I was trying to do. And the voice said, "Oh, I understand, but I'm terribly afraid that won't be possible at this time. You are to be put on trial in Aktau under Kazakh law." And that was a surprise to me. He would just kind of assumed they were going to let me go at some point and I would continue my journey. And the voice continued. "After the trial, if you are found guilty, you will be remanded and serve your sentence in a Kazakh prison. If you are found innocent, you will be released into the custody of the police. They will drive you to the airport and you are to board the first flight out of the country." And I think I said at that point, now suddenly understanding the gravity and the loneliness of my position, that I was facing a jail term in Kazakhstan, I think my response was, "Oh, right. Fuck." And then I asked, "So when will that happen? When am I going on trial?" And the voice replied, "Now, today. The embassy has arranged a lawyer and an interpreter. Good luck." As if it was like a cheerful, "Good luck, old boy." And that was it. The end of the conversation. Everything that follows from this point, for the rest of the next 2 or 3 days, is very hard to explain because alcohol re-enters the story at this point. And a lot of it, I don't think I would understand even if I was sober. There was a lot of backdoor diplomacy happening and a lot of bureaucracy to which I had no exposure. But whatever was going on, the booze was about to make things 10,000 times worse for me. I was given all my stuff back as I was leaving the jail, walked through the jail, walked through the gesture of a gate and facing the desert and the car park. And then I was driven for about 45 minutes or so through the desert at 1,000,000 miles an hour to a junction in the desert, and I was told to get out of the car and wait. So I did. I climbed out of the car, I grabbed my stuff, and the car drove away, leaving me at this junction. And this junction, it wasn't a junction as such, it was just where one dirt road intersected with another dirt road somewhere in the desert. Just for the sake of orientation, and so you can see what the world here looks like and what it must feel like to be an alcoholic in this place. This is the city that I was in when everything went sideways. This is Aktau on the Caspian Sea. And from there, I had gone down to the port south of Aktau, about 70 kilometers, to get a cargo ship to Baku in Azerbaijan on the other side of the Caspian. And it was a long way to the port, that journey. I got there on the back of a motorbike by someone who was sympathetic to my trouble. I told him I had been robbed at gunpoint by the police and he had no trouble believing it. And he gave me a lift the entire way, the 70 kilometers to the port, even though he wasn't himself going there. He was just a good Samaritan. And that port there, Kurik, is where I punched a cop who was trying to take my passport in order to earn a bribe. And then from there, I was eventually taken to a jail, which is down here somewhere, in this area of desert. It's very remote, surrounded by desert. No towns for hundreds of kilometers, I think. And then from there, after about a week, I was driven, I think, to this junction, this one. And this is where I was standing as I pick up the story here. I was stood there alone, looking backwards and forwards down this road, wondering what I was waiting for. I didn't know. And there was nothing really around. I'd seen a small town as we'd come in, and a couple of camels, but I was alone at this junction. And as I said, it wasn't even a junction. It was just an intersection of two unpaved roads at that point. Just very, very dusty. Very hot. And when they had given me back my stuff from the jail, naturally in that stuff was the vodka that I had bought myself for the ferry, the cargo ship across the Caspian Sea. Still about 3 bottles of 1 litre bottles of vodka in there. And the whole time I was in that jail, man, withdrawing, alcohol was all I could think about that whole time. That week was one of fear and the desire to drink. I remember it vividly, just trying to find it in the jail, sniffing the soap to see if there was any alcohol in that. Ugh. And I remember seeing gas pipes along the side of the road, because there are lots of those in Kazakhstan. And I was thinking that I might have to follow them. The logic being either they went to or from a city. And if I was there long enough, I was going to have to flip a coin and decide which way I was going to walk. Because on one hand, I'd be walking for a day back to civilization. The other way, I'm walking into the depths of the central Kazakh desert, into the steppe. If I'd got that decision wrong, I would be walking into the desert of central Kazakhstan, where there is no life. There are no permanent settlements. So instead of doing anything useful to help my situation, as you might expect, given the context of this story, I found some shade and I sat down and I opened a bottle of vodka. Now, this was before I had recognized any need for any kind of treatment, before any thoughts of sobriety or recovery. And I tell you what, after that week in that prison, crying out for alcohol, that first slug of vodka, it went down so smooth. It was so good, man. It was like drinking liquid dopamine. And straight away, as soon as it was in my throat, I felt like I just didn't need to care. So eventually, after, I don't know, maybe an hour or so, a dot appeared on the horizon, a dark dot, and it was moving fast towards me. And this dot, as it gets closer, kind of crystallizes into a car, a powerful one, and it is going top speed, a cloud of dust and sand behind it. And at a certain point, I recognized it as an Audi Q7. And I remember that because it was such an unlikely expensive car to be in a place like this. I had a taxi in Kazakhstan once where the steering wheel had fallen off and the driver was using a wrench attached to the steering column to steer it. If that had shown up, I would have thought nothing of it. But a $100,000 car in this place, I had a hunch. Call it whatever the male equivalent of female intuition is, that it was for me. So as it approached, I necked as much vodka as I could possibly fit in my stomach, as my stomach would accept, slipped the bottle into the bag, and waited for it to approach. And it hammered down the road towards me and then slammed on the brakes. The window winds down, and this friendly woman's face in a sari sticks out and yells at me, "Mr. Nugent!" And I kind of look around as if to emphasize the fact that there's not a person around for 100 fucking kilometers. And I'm like, well, yeah, obviously, I'm I'm him. So I'm drunk at this point. I've been drinking vodka neat from the bottle in the baking desert sun for, I don't know, an hour or so. So I gather up my stuff and I jump in the back seat of this Audi. Now, my dad used to work for Rolls-Royce and Bentley. And growing up, I'd quite often have the chance to be a passenger in a late 90s supercar. It was like McLaren F1 era. And I can say with certainty that I have never been in any car that has gone as fast as this one for as long as this one. Never been in a vehicle going that fast for that long. Apart from an aeroplane, perhaps. I mean, the driver just had his foot flat on the floor, like the rev hitting the limiter the whole way, well in excess of 100 miles an hour, braking only for the odd camel in the road here and there. And while he was doing that, he was introducing himself. He had his foot flat on the floor, driving with one hand, shaking mine with his other, going, "Hello, I am Radik. I am your lawyer." I shouldn't laugh. So I'm in the back seat. I'm fresh out of jail. I'm drunk as hell. And I'm enjoying myself. I'm having a whale of a time, man. Feeling like a VIP with half a bottle of vodka in my system. Feeling like equilibrium was restoring within my body and a whole new adventure starting. I was having fun. I felt like all of this was happening to somebody else and I was just a passenger in it. I felt safe. I was not. So we blasted back to Aktau at the speed of sound, and there was a desperate rush to get paperwork done from various different police stations and offices. But I was not in a rush. I was only thinking about the bottle, and at every opportunity, I stole myself away, made an excuse to go to a bathroom, and drank the vodka from the bottle while I was peeing. The bottle in one hand and my dick in the other, and coming out more drunk every time that happened. And at some point, as we approached the city again, my phone picked up signal for the first time in over a week. And the first message was from my girlfriend at that time, telling me that she had slept with somebody else while I was in the jail. And that's a bad hangover, isn't it? 7 days withdrawing in a prison in Kazakhstan. You come out, your girlfriend has cheated on you. She and I are on good terms again, and I recognise that was my fault. No, that's another story. Okay, so all of that, and it's only midday at this point. My lawyer, Radik, turned out to be something of a big shot around town. Everyone knew him, everybody liked him. He was the kind of person that can just get stuff done. He was a doer of things, a mover, a shaker, a maker of things happening. He was one of those. Incredibly impressive. A powerful guy, even though he was only about 5'5". He was a big shark in a small pond out there, and I could sense it. And I couldn't believe that he had been assigned to me and was working pro bono. It didn't make sense. Why me? Well, that will come clear shortly, I promise. So after being moved from police station to police station, office to office, all day, Radik eventually pushed me into a courtroom. He said, "This is where the trial is happening." And I don't know exactly what I expected in there. I think that a bit of me was suspecting it would be kind of like a little tribunal, perhaps a small courtroom in an office or something like that. But no, it was like the House of Lords in there. All wooden panels and benches. And all of these people came in, like photographers and journalists and stenographers, and people in suits that I didn't recognise. All of them looking very important and I'm sure had big titles and jobs to do. And then everybody suddenly stands up, and Radik gestures to me to stand up as well, and I do. Kind of shaky on my feet, a bit wobbly from all the alcohol. And in walk these 3 magisterial judges with the robes and the curled white wigs, everything. It was a proper, real trial, ostensibly. With no warning for me, no preparation, no opportunity to seek other counsel or anything like that. This was what was happening. I was being put on trial, and that was it. I had no say. I'm about to be put on trial for the future of my life. And I'm drunk as shit. Stood there in the same clothes I've been wearing for 3 months, ever since I cycled from China. Missing teeth and just kind of grinning drunkenly in the middle of this courtroom. All eyes on me every now and then. And I was on trial not just for overstaying the visa, which was the original trouble that I got into, and not just for punching a cop, but they had also accused me of trying to steal that cop's gun. Those cops knew that I hadn't done it. I hadn't tried to steal his gun. It's ridiculous. Instead, they recognised that they probably had some justification work to do for the rough handling during my arrest. They'd given me a pretty serious beating. They'd kicked my teeth out. They needed to justify to a court of law why that happened, so they invented this "I went for his gun" story. Hence the lofty charge. The trial itself was all in Russian from start to finish, and I know exactly 3 phrases of Russian: hello, fuck off, and 1 beer please. Beyond that, it's a mystery. So what I was doing was I was watching Radik, who was on my left, the whole time, my lawyer. I was looking to him, and when he nodded, I would say, da. And when he shook his head, I would say, niet. And that is how I went on trial. I can't believe I survived. And there was a tone of seriousness at the beginning of the court that lent it a great sense of gravity and felt very imposing and quite scary. But over time, the courtroom kind of relaxed. And Radik began making jokes about me at my expense to make the judges laugh. I'm not sure what the jokes were, but I laughed also. I thought I'd better join in. I wanted to come across kind of apologetic and meek and mild. So I don't know what he was saying about me, but the judges found it very funny. Towards the end, before the sentencing, I had to give a statement in English. And naturally, I hadn't been prepared for this. It was a statement I would give, and it would be translated live by the translator. I had no preparation for this, and Radik said to me, "Apologise and keep it short." That was all I had to go on. People who are as drunk as I was in that courtroom, well, were not known for being particularly concise or contrite. But I managed to muddle through. I remember in particular apologising for damaging the reputation of the hospitable nation of Kazakhstan, is how I phrased it. And they liked that one very much. And I apologised for punching the policeman. But I've had a lot of time to think about it. And I'm not sure that I would have acted differently today in sobriety. I think he was trying to rob me. He was trying to rob me. He was trying to take my passport, the most valuable thing that I had, in order to earn a bribe. And he deserved a punch in the face. The difference is that now, in sobriety, I would never be in that situation to begin with. That's the difference. But in the end, it didn't really matter. My behaviour in court, as long as I apologised, the rest was just performance. It was, in essence, an old-style Soviet show trial. I didn't piece this together until much later, but what I didn't know at that time, and which I think might be crucial for the context of this story, was that same day that I was put on trial, the 12th of August 2018, was, for the first time ever, the day Vladimir Putin arrived in Aktau. And with that knowledge, things make a little bit more sense. So the way I see it, when I got that call from the embassy while I was in jail, an agreement had already been reached about me. They didn't want some drunk Westerner who'd got his ass kicked by the police, of all people, hanging around in their jail being a diplomatic nuisance while Putin was in town. So they came to an agreement behind closed doors in which I would apologise for being a drunken idiot, take responsibility for punching the cop, and in its benevolence, the government of Kazakhstan would allow me to go free. And that's exactly what happened. After the trial, I was put in the back of a van and driven straight to the airport, from the courtroom to the airport. And I was drinking the whole way in the back of that van. I don't remember the airport. In fact, I only have a snapshot, really, of the flight itself, where I was sat next to a very friendly Kazakh guy who had a mortal fear of flying. He usually crossed the Caspian by boat, but today he had to fly, and he hated it. And he spoke some English, and we kind of bonded over our discomfort on the aeroplane, and he bought us a bottle of vodka to share between us for that 1 hour flight. And then I was out of Kazakhstan at last, and in Azerbaijan. And of course, I'd brought myself with me. I hadn't left myself behind. Everywhere I go, there I am. If Kazakhstan was where everything went wrong, Azerbaijan is where I truly stopped caring. I was sleeping rough on the blistering hot streets of Baku. For a month, I think, I was there, slumming it. living out of my backpack. The weather is good enough there that, especially at night, it's warm enough that you can sleep outdoors relatively comfortably. And sometimes I would leave the city. I'd walk all the way to the fringes of the edge of the city, where there was some green space, and I would stay there for a couple of days until money was running low, and then I'd come back into town. And I would camp out near the big foreign hotels. Down near the waterfront, in fact, I slept one night inside the Formula One track. But I have no real comprehension of the passage of time in that period. Every single day for that period was the same. A mission for the strongest alcohol I could find. That was the sole purpose of waking up, and it began immediately. I would beg, usually foreigners, or people like me, I should say, people who are not nationals and visiting, and hanging around the expensive hotels. I would ask them for money for food. But what I would actually do is I would wake up at 6:30 in the morning before the shops were open, and I would steal the bread that had been delivered and was waiting outside the doors, and then use the money that I'd begged to buy vodka. That's how I would keep myself going. And usually by 9 or 10 a.m., there was a window in my drunkenness where I topped up enough that I was able to function and appear relatively stable and normal, and I wasn't too drunk to get things done. And that window would last about 2 hours every day before I tipped over into being too drunk to be effective. And in those windows, I would sneak into the Hilton in Baku on the waterfront, and I would use their computer suite to send emails to my family and read the news and check social media. And they would kick me out sometimes. They had learned to recognize me. I'm not exactly discreet in a place like Azerbaijan. But sometimes they would let me stay if I pleaded with them long enough. My goal was to transfer some money from a UK bank account into one that I could use, with the intention of buying a new bicycle in Baku and restarting the journey, just continuing. But my God, I was in no condition to do that. I was dying. I was dying fast. Every day I moved a little bit closer. It was pathetic. I was stood outside the Hilton one day. This memory is so painful that I didn't even put it in my book that I wrote about this experience. And I asked this good-looking Middle Eastern couple for some cash. I told them that I'd been robbed and I needed some money for a hostel that night. And the man looked at me up and down and he said, "What happened to the $50 I gave you yesterday and the 20 before that?" And it turns out this guy had already given me quite a lot of money, and I didn't even remember him. Couldn't even place his face. And he was angry at me, and I remember him swearing, and I was unable to defend myself from it. But he was right. It was deeply, deeply wounding, because that interaction, that exchange with that man, it punctured straight through this fiction that I built for myself. And it showed me the truth. Where I had thought I was this romantic, down on his luck traveller, just walking the earth, I was in fact a drunk vagrant, the same as anywhere else in the world. He had seen through my lie, and it came crashing down on me like a ton of bricks. He knew I wasn't trying to get home. I didn't want a room for the night. I wanted to get blasted every day and pretend that I wasn't scared. And then finally, the big one happened. I woke up in a park one morning to discover that my passport had been stolen from my bag, which I was using as a pillow. And I took a big slug of vodka and I ran to the British consulate in Baku, the embassy. And I'm pretty sure they were expecting me, because one of the very first things they told me to do was to stop drinking. I sincerely think that they were told by the embassy in Kazakhstan to look out for me because I was in such a state. They were almost expecting me. Embassies talk to each other. I don't think it's that unrealistic to believe that. They knew who I was and they knew what I was. Now let me tell you about that embassy for a moment in Azerbaijan. It was staffed by the most incredibly human, sympathetic group of people I've ever encountered. Every time I was there, they treated me with nothing but empathy and pathos. Especially one young woman who worked there, who I spoke to regularly. She was half British and half Azeri. I can't tell you her name, I don't want her to get into trouble, but I could see the concern for me that she had just all over her face. She wanted to help me. Me. I'd crossed all of Central Asia drunk out of my fucking mind. Punching people and having sex and stealing things and puking in public. I didn't deserve help. And she just wanted me to get home. I'd asked for a short-term loan from the embassy, and they said that they can't give me a loan. They can't give me anything. It's not part of their remit. Because she could see that I was struggling. And every day I would go there, and the security guard with whom I became friends brought me cooked food every day from his own home. He was not employed by the British government. He could get in no trouble for doing it. But every day he would bring in food for me, and he would sit with me, and he would ask me about what it was like to walk in England. And he eventually told me that the woman that I spoke to, who was working in the embassy, would give him $5 at the end of every night out of her own pocket to cover the cost of the ingredients. There's just so much good in people sometimes. Like, you just don't know, you don't appreciate it at the time. Much later, everybody on that embassy team, everybody on that embassy team, they were part of my amends. I had to do it by email in the end, but they all replied. But things didn't get better anytime soon, so I had to go to the police station and file a report about my stolen passport, and then produce that for the embassy in order to process my emergency travel document, my temporary passport. But the night that I got the written police statement, the crime report, that was also stolen. And I had to go back through the process the following day, still drunk. They hated me in that police station. I was there, I had to be there quite a lot, and I had a screaming match with one of the, officers on duty in about what, I don't know, but they were tired of my shit, that's for sure. When I got the second one, the embassy kept it. They took it from me and they kept it because they knew that I would lose it again. And every time I was there, they begged me to quit drinking. And I pretended that I wasn't even drunk. Just out of hubris, I pretended that I hadn't been drinking, even though I was clearly hammered and had been for a long time. So stupid. Eventually, I had the emergency travel document and a flight booked to London. My parents had paid. I didn't know this at the time, but my parents had been in close contact with the embassy. The embassy can't divulge any information, but my parents knew more than I did about my condition, the state that I was in. And they were following along daily updates from the embassy. Thank God for that embassy. And I arrived for that flight to London, and I was so drunk they wouldn't let me on the plane. And I missed the flight. So another flight was booked the next day. The embassy had told my parents what had happened. I was too drunk to get on the plane. Man, this is painful stuff. I was too drunk to get on the plane. So my parents had just said, I don't care, let's just get him home. And they paid for another ticket. The embassy had told me that if I was not on that next flight, there might be some kind of police intervention. I'm not sure what that meant, but once I had arrived at the airport, a person had been assigned to me from the embassy to ensure that I didn't leave again, or that I didn't drink. He was on me like a bodyguard. And I'm not sure why, but it was made very clear to me that if I was not on the plane that I was booked on, I was in serious trouble. I'm not sure what it was to this day. And on the day of my flight, the following day, a number of the staff of the embassy came to ensure that I got on that flight without any trouble. And I remember I was at the gate waiting to go through the terminal, and I was given a form to sign, some kind of contract or a fine. Quite a lot of money, I remember, that told me if I returned to the country, I would have to pay this fine. It's a way of not banning you from the country, but deterring you from returning, I suspect. But I remember holding that form in my withdrawing hands, badly withdrawing at this point, withdrawing and shaking so hard that I couldn't write the date and I couldn't sign my own name. I could barely hold the pen. It was the first time I'd been sober in over a month. And those embassy staff, they waited in the terminal with me for hours, and it was a Sunday too, so that was their time. That's how serious it was. And on that flight, I was really withdrawing. It was bad. And I had my head against the front of the chair in front of me, and every motion of the aeroplane made me want to heave and throw up. And I think the air stewards had been told that, or perhaps they just knew from experience that I was withdrawing, and they gave me free beer throughout the flight. And I had my first ever hallucination on that flight, in which I thought the plane was crashing, and all of the passengers around me were throwing up their hands and praying loudly to Allah in anticipation of their death, reciting the Islamic death prayer. And I'm pretty sure that was my first toe in the delirium tremens water. So I remained in England for 2 weeks, stayed with my parents until I was convinced that I was back to normal, that everything was okay, that I was safe to continue my life. That pink cloud, man, it's no joke. The first couple of weeks of sobriety, especially if it's your first time getting sober, it can make you feel like you're on top of everything. You're in complete control, that you've got everything figured out. But no, that 2 weeks was not long enough. It was not even close. I'd had no treatment, sought no help, consulted no health professionals or addiction experts. I had no idea that there was a problem. At this time, I still didn't even know that I'd suffered a head injury. But in my hubris, in my arrogance, I just felt like that part of my life was over. I was a new man, and I was ready to be a moderate drinker. So after those 2 weeks of sobriety in Cornwall in England, I moved again to Zagreb in Croatia to restart my job, which was waiting for me there. And I survived about a week in that job before I started drinking again. And it got bad there. It got bad in Zagreb. I was drinking heavily at lunchtimes. Again, it was only hard liquor, never beer, really, unless I was drinking with other people. And I didn't want them to see how hard I was drinking. It happened so fast, man. It happened so fast. One day I was sober, the next I was drinking at lunchtime. And then I was straight back to drinking a litre a day, just so fast. And then finally one day, after about 5 weeks, something told me that I had a problem. I knew, for the first time, I knew I had a drinking problem. There was nothing that triggered it. It was more like the accumulation of different factors. It was a Sunday, and I woke up in the morning and I realized that all this needed to stop. And I went sober that day. And the evening rolled around. I was due to work on Monday morning. And if you're familiar with alcohol withdrawal, there is no sleep. Insomnia is like the number one symptom of withdrawal, and even hangover to an extent. But I didn't know anything about that at the time. And I remember being in bed that night, extreme discomfort, rolling around and sweating and unable to sleep. And I thought, you know what? This isn't good enough. And at 3 a.m. that night, the sleeplessness and the awful anxiety drove me out of my apartment to the 24-hour gas station where I bought a bottle of vodka and some over-the-counter sleep medication pills. I don't really remember, but I think I figured what I would do was take the pills and wash them down with the vodka, and I would be good enough to sleep by the time I got back home. I woke up a day later in a hospital in Zagreb with an IV line in each arm and a feeling that I had had my stomach pumped. I had no idea what I was doing there. And again, I didn't realize this until much later, but I was highly delusional on that ward. Again, perhaps the first time that I remember experiencing it. I was very frightened, and I was staring at people in a way, in that way that delusional people do, where your reality isn't quite matching up with the reality of everybody else. I was experiencing something different. I believed that I'd been kidnapped by this kind of secret governmental medical team, and that I was having an experiment done on me where they were removing the blood from my body and replacing it with this oxygenated fluid of some kind, like a blood replacement. And this is kind of a weird reference. I know that's like the second movie reference in this video so far, but if you've ever seen the movie The Abyss, there's a bit in it where one of the characters has to manually dive down into the bottom of an oceanic trench, like kilometers down underwater in nothing but a suit. And had he done it just with oxygen, the pressure would have killed him. Instead, they made him breathe this highly oxygenated fluid, the same kind of thing that you breathe when you're in the womb. And that was able to keep him alive and also prevent the damage from the extreme pressure. And that's what they were putting in my body, that exact stuff. So when there were no doctors around, I pulled out the IVs and snuck out of the hospital, discharged myself. Well, I didn't even discharge myself, I just ran. And I ran across Zagreb in my hospital gown back to my apartment, where I discovered that I was in the process of being evicted. The end of my contract had come up, and I knew it had, but I didn't renew it. I just did nothing about it. And I'd been away for a few days at this point. I think I may have been in that hospital for several days, but I will never know. And I remember walking into that apartment as the landlord was putting all of my stuff in bags, empty vodka bottles and stuff like that. And he looked at me, and the only thing he said was, "Man, you live like an animal." And I hurt. And I was confused and I was scared. And I went outside and I slumped to the floor against a wall outside the apartment and I fell asleep. And when I woke up, my boss was standing there. My boss, aware of my fragile state since I arrived, and also having watched my descent on social media, because he was a friend. He had come to the address to check if I was okay after I hadn't shown up for work. I must have been missing for a couple of days. I've never asked. But a whole different kind of rock bottom right there. My boss, the guy who had given me all of these opportunities, vouched for me over and over again, defended me, raised me up, boosted my career. And there he was standing over me, and I had nothing but a plastic bag full of empty vodka bottles to show for my efforts. Nothing but a suitcase and a severe drinking problem to my name. Humiliating. And things moved fast after that. We went back to his house, and in his bathroom, I took off my jacket. I didn't know at this point that I'd been in the hospital, which is weird. I'd got myself changed at some point after being evicted, and I sat outside, but I had no idea that I'd been in hospital, so I went to his bathroom to use it, and I took off my jacket, and suddenly I saw that I still had the, what do you call them, the joists? Or something, the IV taps that go into your arm. They're still both in my forearms. And I was horrified. Suddenly that delusion came back that I'd been experimented on, and suddenly it was real again. And I pulled out the IVs really quickly, causing arterial blood to spray all over my boss's bathroom. too much for me to clean up. And I had to go back out there and just apologize. A truly, truly awful day in my life. And it's the one that kick-started my journey to recovery. Heavy stuff. And it got worse before it got better. The delirium tremens video that's on my channel, the one that brings most people, the most new people to this channel, all of that stuff happened after this, long after this. There was still about 8 months of drinking litres of hard liquor every day before I even began to seriously try to get sober permanently. I'm still at it now, in fact. Like, my most recent relapse wasn't that long ago. I'm still in it. I don't take it for granted that I'm still alive after that. It could have gone a different way 1,000 different times. That's a heavy burden to carry every day. I'm okay right now, feeling very good about my sobriety and my recovery, but I'm also aware that that version of me is only 30 seconds away at any given time. And that experience in Croatia and Zagreb, being found in a heap by my boss, who was a personal friend, and I was just an absolute irredeemable mess, it proved to me that that kind of drinking makes you selfish in complete ways, completely unique ways. When you're that deep in this illness, you feel sometimes like no one has any right to control you, and that it's your life to do with as you will. It's your life, hell to everybody else. You can mess it up if you want to, that's your choice. But the truth is, our lives are not completely our own. There are families and friends and bosses and embassy security guards, all of whom have a vested interest in your life, in your well-being. Their lives are affected by your life. So it is not just your life. And drinking selfishly, as I did, doesn't just impact your own life. It hurts everyone. And it does it in ways that you, in your selfishness, can't even imagine. So, that was roughly my journey from a very rock bottom up to the point where I began to consider sobriety, began to recognize I had a problem. And I'll recount the rest of that another time. I have other stuff to talk to you about that's probably more interesting. If you would like to hear about that another time, make sure you subscribe. Share your experiences in the comments. I read and reply to everything as a matter of principle. You've taken the time to listen to me. I will take the time to respond. And thank you for watching. And as always, good luck out there.